Biography of a grain of salt. Go to your kitchen and open the cupboard. Take out the salt shaker. Shake a single grain onto a dark surface, a black countertop, or a piece of construction paper. Now, if you can, look at it through a magnifying glass. If you are like most people, you expect it to look like a tiny, jagged rock, a miniature version of the stone we studied before. But it isn't. If the grain is high quality, you will see something unsettling, a perfect cube. It has sharp corners, flat faces, and right angle. Nature generally hates squares. Nature loves curves, fractals, and chaotic tangles. But here, sitting on your table, is a piece of perfect order. It is a tiny, translucent fortress. For most of human history, this little cube was more valuable than gold. Men were paid in it. Empires were built to guard it. Revolutions were sparked by the tax on it. We call it common today, but that is a modern lie. Salt is anything but common. It is a chemical miracle born of two monsters, a preservative that defies the will of rot, and the literal spark that allows your brain to think the word salt. This is the biography of a grain of salt. It is the story of the will to halt. Chapter 1. The Marriage of Monsters, the Ionic Bond. To understand the salt, we have to talk about its parent, and its parents are terrifying. In our previous biographies, we met carbon, the socialite, and water, the witness. Salt is different. Salt is the result of a peace treaty between two of the most violent elements in the universe, sodium and chlorine. Sodium is a frantic, explosive metal. If you drop a lump of pure sodium into a puddle of water, it doesn't just sink. It screams and explodes in a lilac-colored flame. It is an element with an identity crisis. It has one electron too many, and it is desperate to get rid of it. Chlorine is a deadly pale green gas. If you breathe it in, it turns into acid in your lungs and kills you. It was used as a chemical weapon in the trenches of World War I. It is an element with a greed problem. It is one electron short of a full set, and it will tear apart anything in its path to steal one. Under normal circumstances, these two are villains. But when they meet, something beautiful happens. Sodium says, "Please, take this electron." Chlorine says, "Finally, give it to me." They exchange the electron, and in that moment of chemical altruism, they both become stable. They lock together in a grip so tight that it forms a crystal lattice. This is the ionic bond. It is a molecular handshake that turns two poisons into a life-giving nutrient. They stop being explosive and toxic. They become sodium chloride. They become the cube. Chapter 2. The Ancient Sea, the Deep Weight. Our grain of salt was born hundreds of millions of years ago in an ocean that no longer exists. Back then, the drop of water was busy dissolving the stone. As the rain washed over the young earth, it stripped ions of sodium and chlorine from the rocks and carried them into the sea. For eons, the oceans became saltier and saltier. Then the climate shifted. A vast, shallow sea, perhaps in what is now the Sahara Desert or the basement of an American prairie, became cut off from the rest of the world. The sun, driven by the Great Glitch, began to beat down. The water evaporated, rising into the sky to start its next reincarnation. But the salt couldn't go. It had no will to fly. As the water vanished, the concentration of ions became too high. The handshake began. Millions of little cubes started to form, snowing down to the bottom of the drying sea. Over millions of years, they were buried under layers of sediment. The weight of the world, gravity, pressed down on them, turning the soft salt into halite, or rock salt. Our grain spent 200 million years in total darkness. It was a time capsule. While dinosaurs rose and fell, while the continents drifted like slow-motion rafts, the salt sat in perfect, crystalline silence. It was waiting for the one creature that couldn't live without it, us. Chapter 3. The Salarium, the weight of power. Fast forward to the rise of the Roman Empire, humanity has a problem. We have evolved to be hunters and gatherers, but we have decided to become farmers. This means we are eating mostly plants. Plants are low in sodium. If a human doesn't get enough salt, their muscles cramp, their heart falters, and they die. In the ancient world, salt was the difference between life and death. But more importantly, it was the only way to halt time. Before refrigerators, rot, the will of entropy, was the king of the world. If you killed a pig in the summer, the meat would be spoiled by the next morning. But if you rubbed our grain of salt into that meat, the will to halt took over. Salt is hygroscopic. It loves water so much that it rips it out of the cells of bacteria. It dehydrates the invaders until they shrivel and die. Salt turned food into a stone. It allowed armies to march across deserts because they could carry preserved meat. It allowed explorers to cross ocean. Because of this, salt became the first global currency. The Romans built the Via Salaria, the Salt Road, specifically to bring salt from the coast to the city. Roman soldiers were often paid in bags of salt. This payment was called a salarium. Look at that word, salarium. This is where your salary comes from. When you go to work on Monday, you are working for the modern ghost of that little white cube. If you are worth your salt, you are a valuable asset. In the ancient market, a pound of salt was often traded for a pound of gold. Our grain was white gold. Chapter 4. The electrical spark, the salt in your head. But why do we crave it so much? Why is salty one of the 5 primary languages of the tongue? It's because you are a biological battery. Every thought you have, every time you twitch your pinky finger, every time your heart beats, you are using a sodium-potassium pump. Your nerves are like long, wet wires. To send a signal, your brain has to move sodium ions across a membrane. This creates a tiny electrical zap. Without our grain of salt, the electricity in your body would go out. The grid would fail. You would be a stone without the will to persist. When you taste salt, your tongue is actually performing a quality control check. Your brain says, yes, we need that. That is the spark. Give me more. We are the only animals that have gone to war over a seasoning, and it's because we are addicted to the electric handshake that keeps our consciousness running. Chapter 5. The rebel grain, the tax, and the march. Because salt was a necessity, it became the ultimate tool of the will to control. Kings and empires realized that if you own the salt, you own the people. In France, there was a hated tax called the gabelle. It forced every person over the age of 8 to buy a certain amount of salt every week at a high price. If you couldn't pay, you went to prison. This tax was one of the primary reasons for the French Revolution. The will to halt was being used to halt the lives of the poor. The most famous moment in the biography of salt, however, happened in 1930. India was under British rule, and the British had made it illegal for Indians to collect their own salt from the sea. They wanted the tax. A thin, elderly man named Mahatma Gandhi decided to fight back, not with a sword, but with a grain of salt. He walked 240 miles to the coast in what is called the Salt March. When he arrived, he reached down to the sand, picked up a small, crusty lump of salt, and held it up. By that simple act, he broke the law. He showed that the will to halt belongs to the earth, not to an empire. That tiny grain of salt became the glitch that eventually brought down British rule in India. Chapter 6. The paradox, the enemy of the stone. Now we come to the character flaw of our grain. As strong as the ionic bond is, it has one major weakness: water. The stone we studied before can sit in a river for 1,000 years and remain a stone. But if our grain of salt falls into a glass of water, it vanishes in seconds. The drop of water is the only thing that can convince sodium and chlorine to let go of each other. The polar molecules of the water wiggle their way in between the ion, prying the handshake apart. The cube dissolves. The order is lost. This is the paradox of salt. It is hard as a rock, yet it is as fragile as a ghost. It can preserve a piece of ham for a century, but it cannot survive a rainstorm. It is a temporary fortress. This is why salt is often used as a symbol of covenant or permanence in religion. To eat salt with someone is to say, our bond is as strong as the ionic bond. But it is also a reminder that everything, even the most perfect cube, can be undone by the right environment. Chapter 7. The final seasoning. Today, our grain of salt is a victim of its own success. We have become so good at mining the ancient seas, using massive machines to dig miles underground, that salt is now cheap. We throw it on our roads to melt ice, another example of the will to halt, stopping water from becoming a glacier. We put way too much of it in our processed food, forcing our hearts to work harder to maintain the electric spark. We have forgotten that this grain is a veteran. We treat it like dust, but it is actually a survivor of a 200-million-year-old ocean. It is a chemical miracle that turned 2 poisons into the flavor of life. Pick up that shaker one more time. Shake a few grains into your palm. Look at those tiny cubes. They are the will to halt. They stop the rot. They stop the decay. They hold time still. They are the will to spark. They provide the electricity that allows you to feel the weight of the salt on your skin. They are the will to power. They are the ghost of every salary ever paid and every empire that ever rose. The universe wants to tear you down. Entropy wants to turn your body back into chaotic gas and dust. But for now, you have a peace treaty running through your vein. You have the ionic bond keeping your heart in rhythm. When you eat that grain of salt, you are absorbing a piece of an ancient, dried-up sea. You are fueling your biological glitch. So show the salt shaker some respect. It isn't just a condiment. It is a box of perfect order in a world of mess. It is the white gold of the earth, reminding us that sometimes the most common things are the most curious of all. Eat, spark, persist, and maybe, like the grain of salt, try to be worth your salary.